he came in and looked a bit sheepish. I don't know if that's the right word, but he certainly looked concerned and a little bit breathless. His voice was wobbling a little bit, and I was like, okay. And I think he really struggled to deliver the news, actually. But he said, look, we've got the results of the MRI, and your heart has suffered a pretty serious insult, to use his exact words. Hi, and welcome to the There's Another Way podcast with me, Adam Halvorsen.
And me, Pete Dolby. And you've come to the place where each episode will be shining a light on authentic people who have chosen an alternative path to their new normal to find another way. Here we go.
Here we go.
Second special episode, Song's Guest again. We clearly you had a very unexpected start to 2024 this year with the health issues that we've hinted at in previous episodes, and I suppose you really wanted to wait until the time was right to talk about them because it's been such a significant impact on your life, hasn't it? So
yeah, I think now it feels like a good time. We have, like you said, we have alluded to it in some previous episodes, and feels like there's been enough water under the bridge now to kind of get the news out there, and hopefully from doing this as well, we can put a positive spin on what was quite a difficult situation.
Well, putting it mildly, yeah, absolutely. So if we rewind, we recorded the Inspiring Tina's podcast, where she talked about the battle of a lifetime that she's having. We were talking about how we would even think about tackling something faced with such a grave situation like that. We just didn't know. That went live. I think during that podcast you said we're all going to die at some point, and that's a good thing. I remember that one sticking out. And I think what you meant by that was, we've got finite time on this planet. Let's just make the most of it. Just go and live life. Don't get bogged down with the small things. Just go and live your life. Yeah,
I think when you hear that statement cold, it can sound quite dark and morbid.
It's true.
But it's true. I love that statement because actually it's a real positive. It's a reminder that these difficult situations, obviously death being the ultimate difficult situation, but it is there to give us that reminder of what life is about.
Yeah.
And we'd obviously much rather not have to deal with these realities. But yeah, like I said, it is a weird statement in a way because it can sound very negative, but I think it's really positive and it's almost highlights the meaning of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. And Tina's podcast went live on the Monday evening. On the Tuesday, we interviewed Scott Shearer.
Yes, yeah.
About insight into professional football. And then the next morning, we went on one of our usual walks with the dogs. It's about 5 kilometres. A walk's a walk, but it's in the winter when it's muddy, through the woods, up the hill. It's quite a strenuous walk. It's and you can really feel it in the winter.
Yeah, it's kind of a hike, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And we do that most mornings, and it's great exercise. And I remember that morning you said, "Oh, I'm feeling this a little bit. This walk."
Yeah,
which is unusual for you because we do a fair amount of exercise.
Yeah, I think my exact phrase was, well, I'm blowing a little bit. Are you feeling okay? And you were fine. And I was definitely slow and feeling it. But I think we just put it down to COVID because I'd had that a few weeks before.
Yeah.
And it was just still a bit of a sort of repercussion from that, basically. But as we know now, it was obviously a lot more than that.
Something more sinister was on the horizon. So you soldiered on and went and had one of the most intense tennis matches of your life at the Queen's Club.
Yeah. I guess it probably wasn't the smartest thing to do to... what happened was I got back from that dog walk and I remember I sat down on my bed and got an alert from my Apple Watch, which I didn't even know until this point was a thing, that gave me a warning that my heart had been under 40 beats per minute for over 10 minutes. I had no idea what that meant. And I'd been getting some funny readings from the watch. So I kind of thought, well, actually, maybe it's just playing up a little bit because that sounds strange. And I didn't think much of it, which was a bit daft. But yeah, then maybe a little bit daft of me to do this, but I arranged to play tennis that day at Queen's Club, which was something I really didn't want to miss, because obviously it's quite a special thing to be able to do. You know, I've got a really close family friend mentor who is quite high up there, and he'd invited me to play, so I didn't want to miss it. And yeah, it kind of felt okay, but just sort of felt something wasn't quite right. But yeah, went through with it and played a pretty intense hour of tennis, then followed by a hit session. Funnily enough, in the tennis, you know, the guy I was mentioning before, he did say, like, are you on your normal self? And I just said, no, I am a bit more breathless than normal, but I kind of just pushed through it, and we're still playing some pretty serious stuff. And then did the hit session, and actually I felt better during the hit session. But I, in the back of my mind, knew something wasn't quite right. And I think, again, like my tennis partner was a bit surprised, you know, at sort of how quickly I was getting tired.
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember recounting the story that we're about to tell, or you're about to tell, to a very good friend of mine. And he said he knew of about 3 or 4 people that had been alerted to a problem from the Apple Watch or the watch that they're wearing, that they needed to go and seek help. And I think technology is much maligned sometimes, but I think it's an amazing advancement, really, isn't it? When you think, if you rewind 20 years, no one would have had that technology in their wrist to flag such a problem. So I mean,
yeah. Well, to continue the story and just to highlight that, so when I got back from Queen's Club and got home, I was monitoring the watch quite a lot. And the kind of magic number it seemed to sort of want to stay on was around, or my heart wanted to stay on, was around 42 beats a minute.
And what's a normal? I know there's no such thing as normal, but what's a normal heart range?
My normal is around 55 to 65.
Right.
You know, because I'm relatively fit.
Yeah.
It's always been quite stable, but I think 65 is about normal.
Okay.
Maybe a bit higher or lower depending on your fitness, but yeah, 40, anywhere around 40s, unless you're, you know, an elite ultra marathon runner, then that isn't normal.
Yeah.
40 isn't normal. So yeah, when I got back from Queen's and was monitoring it, it just wasn't really shifting. It was staying around that level. I still kind of went about my day as normal, but I said to my wife, Kat, you know, like, I'm not sure about this. I tried a few other devices. I tried her watch. I tried, I've got like a blood pressure monitor that also does your heart rate, and they were all consistently showing that kind of number.
You felt okay in yourself, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I maybe was a bit more tired and a bit more lethargic, but I remember sitting in my lounge just watching a bit of telly, and I said, you know, look, I'm just going to go to bed. It's probably not normal, but hopefully it will sort itself out with a good night's sleep. And it's something maybe COVID related. And we just sat there thinking, yeah, it'll be fine. So yeah, but then I woke up around 3 a.m. that next sort of morning.
We were due to meet at 6:30ish to take the dogs out, weren't we?
That's right. And I think I messaged you saying, look, I'm not going to be there, because I'd rung 111, and which for international listeners is like it's not like an emergency number, but it's almost like a sort of over the phone triage. Yeah, exactly. And pretty quickly, when they heard my symptoms, they were like, yeah, we want you to go to A&E. And if you can, try and get a lift there. But I didn't want to wake everybody up, so just drove myself over. But yeah, and obviously that's when it all took a bit of a turn, basically. Might just be worth saying, actually, before we go into all of this, just to be clear, obviously we're going to go through quite a lot of heart-related topics. You know, probably need some kind of disclaimer, which is obviously we're not medical experts, so don't take any advice from this, but I guess we'll go through certain procedures and stuff like that will probably give people some insight into that.
Yeah, I think that's a sensible thing to say. I think having been through this so recently, I think there's definitely a lot you can take from it, but if there's any concerns, go and seek medical attention would be the key point, I think. But
yeah.
So you drive into hospital 6 o'clock in the morning. How
it's like 3:30 in the morning.
Really?
Yeah.
How did you feel about that?
I suppose there was something in my mind that knew something wasn't great. You know, when you unfortunately go down the Google rabbit hole, you read these types of things, and you know what came up pretty quickly was a thing called bradycardia, which is sort of the opposite of tachycardia. So tachycardia is like a fast rhythm, bradycardia is a slow rhythm.
Yeah.
And most of the stuff that you read about why bradycardia happens isn't particularly great. So, yeah, I guess in the car I was sitting there thinking, I really hope this isn't something particularly sinister. And, you know, let's wait and see. But I felt so normal. I was just listening to some music, just thinking it'll be another one of those trips to A&E where you sort of feel a bit daft for going there, and you hope you don't have to waste
someone's time.
Yeah, and you're going to sit in a queue for 7 hours.
Yeah, well, it is 7 hours. It's no exaggeration, is it? At the moment, at A&E, the queue. So it must have been strange because you did a lot of exercise. There was a month in November where you ran 5 kilometres every day. We did that together. You did regular exercise. So to be driving to hospital with something questioning around your heart must have been a bit of a strange feeling.
It was. I've always paid attention to my heart. I don't really know why. I think even as a teenager, I had the odd ectopic beat, which is sort of just an additional beat, which usually is nothing to worry about. I guess if they're frequent enough, they can be. And again, I'm not saying ignore irregular beats if you get them, but I think if you Googled an ectopic beat or spoke to a cardiologist, you know, usually they'd be like, yeah, they can happen. You know, you can eat something that disagrees with you or drink too much or something like that. But what was your question? Sorry.
No, I was just saying it must have been strange. Ectopic Beats sounds like a band, by the way.
Yeah,
it must have been strange knowing that you were in decent shape and you did a lot of exercise, walking the strenuous walks every day, running fairly frequently, to be driving to hospital with a question mark over your heart, your cardio.
Yeah, so and that's what I was saying. So I think I'd always been aware of it because I used to get ectopic beats. My mum does as well, and she subsequently takes beta blockers for that. And it was strange because, I mean, we were doing a lot of exercise together. You know, we really crunched that November 5K. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've ever been at the pace I was pre having COVID for the first time in 2020.
And you'd flagged that quite often because you like you say, you used to do a lot of half marathons, and your pace, you were questioning why you couldn't quite get to the pace that you were at before, even though it was a few years ago. Yeah,
my typical like half marathon pace would be about 8-minute miles, maybe a bit more, but around that area. And I just found ever since having COVID, I never got close to that. Or if I did, I'd have to really push. And I could do it, but it's partly why we focused on running so much more around zone 2 stuff, which, you know, obviously is a good part of training anyway. But it's still, even with all of that, and look, maybe there's some clues there in terms of what ended up happening.
Yeah, could have been an underlying,
Yeah, exactly. So it was strange. Yeah, it's really hard to put into words, actually, sort of where your mind goes when you kind of do think something's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, I was relatively optimistic, really, because you just sort of think, well, actually, it'll be a short-term thing. Yeah, exactly.
So you arrived at the hospital, and what happened next then? So you saw the triage people at the hospital, thinking you have to wait 7 hours to see anyone.
Yeah, I was more worried about that, actually, because you know what it's like there at Stoke Mandeville. They do their best, but
of course,
you get there, you sit in a room, they say, oh, just wait here. And actually you think, oh, it's quite quiet. And then you go through to the main bit and it's full of God knows what different types of things you see.
Yeah.
But because I'd said to them, I guess because 111 had said what it was about, things did move quite quickly. The triage guy sat me down and put the finger and heart monitor on my finger. What does that measure? Blood O2 and heart rate, I think. And he said, almost like, mate, what are you talking about? Your heart rate's at 75. And he was almost kind of giving me this vibe of like, why are you wasting my time here? And I just said to him, look, I'll sit down. In about 20 seconds, it will go down to about 40 because that's what it's been doing all day. He said, okay. And that's exactly what it did. And then very quickly, he changed his tune, almost quite apologetically, said, oh, okay, wait there. and then he went through to, I guess, the kind of main bit of A&E. And again, at this point, I was still kind of expecting to be there a long time, but they called me straight through. So again, probably that in my mind, I remember thinking, okay, that wouldn't have happened if they weren't concerned. And then they immediately got me on a ECG, which is, I think, an electric cardiogram. So it monitors the kind of electric signal of your heart, like a kind of sine rhythm. It will kind of almost show it like like you do in physics, those kind of electronic waves.
Yeah.
And I've had quite a lot of them in the past, so I wouldn't say like I know how to read them, but there are certain things, sort of like the distance between each peak and trough on the lines. But actually, I was sat next to this one. They put me on an ECG very quickly, and I looked at the machine, I looked at the screen, and it came up with basically straight away what I guess no one really wanted to see, which was, irregular pattern. Well, I can't remember exactly what it said, but the lady, bless her, who was with me, didn't look overly happy about it. She looked quite concerned and moved quite quickly.
I think when you're in situations like that, you look at the body language of those who are treating you, don't you, for an indicator of where they're at, if they're comfortable with it or not. So that's a flag if that happens.
Yeah, and she moved pretty fast. And she said, look, wait here. Yeah, and then look, from there, things moved fairly sharpish. So they took me into the main kind of emergency unit bit, and there was sort of a series of beds, and they said, look, we really want you to lie on that bed, and we don't want you to move. And I was like, right, okay. They put me on a 12 lead ECG, which is 12 lead just means it's sort of multiple leads. I think it picks up more different types of parts of the heart. And I think they even put it on your feet, for example, to see, what the different rhythm is saying in different parts of the body. And they also put me on a defibrillator. So they had one pad on my sort of over almost where you put where your heart is, and then one I think was on the side of my ribs. So I knew what that meant.
Yeah.
And basically they said, look, we just want you to kind of stay still. And I think it was at this point, maybe it was later, but I think I asked, why am I being put on a defib? And they said, we just want to protect you from sudden death. I was like, okay. And obviously that put a bit of a shock of realism into the situation pretty quickly. But I mean, at this point, I was still relatively, I wouldn't say like jovial, but, I wasn't particularly panicked, or I still kind of hadn't really realised what was going on. And then I guess it was maybe a few minutes after that, someone came back to me, I think a nurse or a doctor, and just said, look, it looks like you're in what we call complete heart block. And I've never heard of that.
I mean, that's a pretty severe phrase, complete heart block.
Yeah, I guess so. It is, but it's also, there are certain words I know about the heart that are serious. So yeah. I used to have a boxer dog that had every heart condition under the sun. Somehow she lived until she was 9, but she had boxer cardiomyopathy because she was a boxer. She had something like hyperventricular tachycardia, I think it was called. And I mean, I knew more about that dog's heart than I did about my own. But through that, I'd got used to some of the lingo. But yeah, I'd never heard of heart block because I guess it's, usually people are more worried about faster rhythms and erratic fast rhythms, whereas mine was the opposite. It was slow. So yeah, it does sound like quite a serious thing. But I suppose I also just thought heart block, that just sounds like something temporary or, maybe it's not that sinister. But yeah, I suppose when you hear it as a word, complete heart block.
Yeah.
And again, they just said, look, we need to get you over to Wickham, which is a specialist cardiac unit. We can't really cater for you here. So look, don't worry, we're not going to blue light you over. It's not that serious, but we need to get you over sharpish. And I suppose I was a bit relieved because it was like, all right, we're not blue lighting. But then I started to sort of Google, I had about 5 minutes to kill waiting for the ambulance. So I started to Google heart block. And basically there's 4 different types of heart block. There's, I think it's done in grades, but There's grade 1, which kind of a lot of people can be walking around with and maybe not even know it. Not particularly serious. Again, I'm not medical, so don't if you have grade 1 heart block, get it checked out. But there's grade 2, sort of 1 and 2, which again have sort of different grades of severity, but you're kind of getting in the realms of you need to get that checked out, and probably pretty urgently. And then grade 3 is obviously the most serious one, which is what they were saying I had. And basically what it means is that it's kind of like an electrical wiring problem in the heart. And what they said to me is that, look, the top chambers and the bottom chambers are not communicating to each other. There's a complete disconnect. So you're basically being kept alive by the top chambers, which I don't know if I've got that right, but it was fairly, when you hear that, and again, understanding sort of loosely about the wiring of the heart and what the atriums and ventricles do, it didn't really make sense to me, but it kind of made me think that's got to be fairly serious. So then the ambulance came, and they're really good guys. I think they were trying to be quite upbeat, but they also could see they put me on their own ECG as I got into the ambulance. And again, they looked a bit concerned. And one of them, though, did say, it looks like you're kind of switching between different grades of heart block. So, hey, look, maybe it's not that bad. And I thought, well, actually, if it's intermittent, then, hey, maybe this is just a little bit of a short-term sort of almost like wiring problem, and they might be able to shock it back into normal rhythm or something. So, yeah, so that's kind of where things got to, I suppose, on the morning that it happened. And sort of, I suppose it wasn't really a diagnosis because they didn't know what had caused it, but at least they knew what kind of the heart had done, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember at the time, it did seem to take an eternity for them to get to the bottom of what the problem was. I mean, understandably so as well when you understand what the condition is, but it must have felt like a lifetime for you being there, sitting around in hospital beds waiting for experts to come and tell you what the problem was. It did seem to take a few days, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, so from there, when I got to Wickham, things really ramped up. When I arrived, all of a sudden, there was a big group of people to meet me, which again, I guess at that point you realise something's going on.
Is that comforting or alarming? A bit of both, probably.
Yeah, it's a hard balance, and I do think when that happened, the reality of the situation did start to hit home, sort of both a bit emotionally, but also, I wouldn't say I was, trembling with fear, but I suppose you realise that maybe this is serious enough to start to really worry about. I mean, I think there must have been 10 people in the room when I arrived at Wickham.
Yeah.
And again, they transferred me off the ambulance bed onto their bed, which was, again, defib me up straight away. And obviously, for those who don't know, a defibrillator is, those pads you get that shock the heart back into rhythm. And they put me back on the ECG, but then they started conducting tests very, very quickly. And, again, credit to the NHS sort of acute care.
Yeah.
What they did very, very fast was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So they did an echocardiogram straight away. And an echocardiogram is almost like an ultrasound of the heart. So picture when you have a scan of a baby, it kind of does that for your heart, and it can show the sort of pumping strength. And I think what it does is it sort of shows in different colours like how the oxygen is moving around, or oxygenated blood is moving around the heart. I think it can give some structural indication of the heart condition as well. So I think it's a pretty good all-round scan. I don't think it's the most detailed, but yeah, so they did one of those, and really what they were trying to find was what was actually going on. So then they did a chest x-ray, I think, and then they did a CT scan, which basically they were trying to see was there anything going on obvious that were being picked up. And then they did, which was, I suppose, probably one of the more uncomfortable procedures, was an angiogram where they go into your wrist. They sort of do a small incision in your wrist, and they go up through your artery, up into, all the way up your arm. And then they basically have a look at your blood vessels and, your, like, how is sort of actually the stuff that's supplying the heart looking. And they did say to me, if we find something, are you comfortable for us to straight away do a procedure if it's needed? And I said, yeah, look, you guys do what you need to do. But yeah, so had all of those scans pretty quickly, which, was very, very grateful for.
Life has a habit of throwing surprises your way. You were holding a tennis racket in your hand at Queen's Club the day before, and then the next day you're having an incision in your wrist to I mean, that's unbelievable sequence of events, isn't it? Yeah,
considering 24 hours before this happening, my life was just completely going on as normal. Yeah. You could say that. Yeah. You could say that. Yeah, there was no warnings. There was no indication that this was happening, apart from maybe a little bit of breathlessness. But that, again, nothing. This was January the 10th that this happened. Yeah. And I mean, look, you were at my house on New Year's Eve, having a few drinks, carrying on as normal. Yeah. So it was a bit nuts. All of a sudden, to be having something put up your artery to see how things are going. It was a little bit of a swift turnaround.
Really was, yeah. And New Year's Eve, you're looking ahead at what the year might bring, and then 10 days later, you're in hospital surrounded by experts.
It's funny actually, because New Year's Eve, I always take a moment to sort of think about what's going to happen the following year. Almost, it is a little bit like make sure you take care of yourself this year. Start thinking about what do I want to achieve, and it's funny that it happens so close after New Year's Eve. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, massively. So you're in the middle of a cardiac ward. You're probably the youngest by about 20 years, having all these tests done and people coming to see you. I mean,
yeah. So after they did a lot of these procedures quite quickly, it slowed down almost as quickly as it had ramped up. I think they'd felt that I was potentially stable enough to kind of not immediately think, okay, we really need to worry about this guy. I mean, they did keep saying the word sudden cardiac death when I arrived and when I was having these procedures, which obviously did start to sort of take a little bit of an effect.
Understandably, yeah.
And I mean, I suppose that there was a moment there where the emotions sort of caught up with me a little bit. I started to think, okay, if they're really worried about sudden cardiac death, I better start to get a few things in order. So that was quite a tough moment. Sort of once all of those scans had finished, I was still, before I went up to the ward, I was sort of sat there in this kind of sort of welcoming bay, if that's what you could call it. And funnily enough, actually, when I got there, it all went crazy, but unfortunately there was a code red, so someone flatlined. So as quickly as everyone came, everyone legged it. And I guess, again, they had to prioritise that person over me. And I remember actually standing, my dad was there, and it was the first time I kind of let the gravity of the situation kind of get to me a bit. But it was strange because it wasn't really through fear or anxiety. It was actually kind of, I said to my dad, I just feel really grateful, because obviously I'd been keeping people in touch, and Kat, I guess, must have told a few people, and I was just getting loads of messages. And you wouldn't think this, but I actually felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude and just thought, you know what? Okay, well, if I am going to go now, at a relatively young age, admittedly, I've had a pretty good crack. If you think about the shit show that a lot of people have to deal with in their lives, I kind of was reflecting, sitting there thinking, well, look, if this is it, then I've got a lot to be grateful for. I think the only thing that I really struggled with was the implications for the kids and Kat. And because they kept saying, you're at risk of sudden death, I started to write letters to them on my phone, and was also trying to do video messages to them. But I kind of kept getting too upset to be able to finish them. So I thought, well, actually, I'll just write them. They're still on my phone, actually. And that wasn't a pleasant thing to have to do, because, but again, I did write those letters with quite a lot of gratitude. You know, I got a chance to reflect on, you know, my kids and Kat and the relationships I have with them. And I was writing, you know, sort of things. I was just trying to impart some wisdom, you know, look, I'm not here anymore, but don't let that, you know, impact your life. Yeah. So that was a strange one, but almost sort of once all of the procedures stopped and they sent me up to the ward, I kind of snapped out of it. I kind of thought, well, look, I've got this far. I haven't had a sudden cardiac event, and they're going to put me on a ward which actually doesn't look quite as bad as where I just was, you know, where people were flatlining. And
you've got the best team possible around you, haven't you, as well?
Yeah, and I felt definitely relieved to be in the right place. Yeah. And also the good news is I learned pretty quickly that we're near quite a lot of specialist cardiac units like the Brompton, Hatfield maybe. There's quite a few good centres where a lot of the doctors sort of cover, you know, they'll be based at multiple locations. Yeah, and I went up to Ward 2A in Wickham General and went to this cardiac unit, and again they were literally like, do not stand up, do not do this, do not do that. So they were still worried.
You were hooked up presumably to lots of different monitors for them to be able to monitor you 24/7.
So they, in that ward, you have these sort of cardiac monitors. They basically constantly monitor you on an ECG, and they have blood pressure machines and blood O2 monitors. So you don't need to be on the blood pressure monitors all the time and the O2 things, although I think some of the more serious cases are. But certainly what they wanted for me was to be constantly monitored on an ECG. And again, they have like different levels, like 2-3 lead, 6 lead, 12 lead. Most of the time I was on a 12 lead, at least for the first couple of days. So I think they really wanted to sort of try and assess me. And after a while of pissing in a pot, I kind of got to the point where I'm like, I asked them if I could sign a disclaimer so that I could walk to the loo.
Yeah.
But they were that worried about me that they didn't even want me standing up or walking. And I got to the point where I was like, I'm gonna need to walk around a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I barely left the bed, and I was monitored constantly. And it was, I don't know if you came and visited me, but, you know, for those listening, you know, cardiac wards are quite noisy places because obviously the priority for the people who work there is to monitor people and assess people and keep them stable and alive. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone there is having a particularly great time, because all these monitors are beeping constantly. And the problem with me was that my heart rate was so low that those monitors make an alert every time a heart goes below 50. I don't know what it was actually, what it beeped for when it goes above anything, maybe 100. But anything slightly abnormal, you would get an alert, like a proper loud alert. The problem with mine is it was so erratic that it was going off every 20 seconds. So it was really hard to relax, because if I would change position, it would go up. But if I sat normally, and obviously you've got those cool hospital beds that, you know, you can adjust the positions. So, but if I just sat normally, it would go down to 41 to, you know, set the alarm off every 20 seconds. So every time I'm like, oh, what's that noise? I couldn't relax.
You had a strange position, didn't you, where you knelt up in a praying position, and it was kind of sorted it out for a while, didn't it?
Yeah, well, with the boredom, I started to try and experiment with things, and I realised that being in a kneeling sort of praying position, the heart rate would get completely normal and stabilise. So I started to think, well, actually, is there something in this? Is it to do with my posture? Is it something that simple? And I thought I'd cracked it, but obviously what I couldn't do is stay in that kind of praying position, especially considering I was wearing a hospital gown so everyone could see my ass.
Well, I'll never forget the photo that was shared with us by Kat, I think, of you in your Japanese-style nightgown in your pants and in a praying position on your knees in the hospital, I think. I'll remember that forever. But yeah, it was, I guess at that stage you were still trying to piece together, you know, what was causing this. And like you say, if moving positions rectified it, then...
Yeah, I mean, one of my only sort of complaints was for the first few days, I didn't get masses of communication. And I don't think that was anyone's fault. I just don't think they knew what was going on.
Yeah.
They had booked me in for an MRI. So an MRI is one of those scans where you have to take a dye that goes into your body. So they're a little bit more invasive. They're a bit more uncomfortable because you're in one of those tubes that you see in films quite often. But because the NHS is busy, I had to wait. I think I went in on a Tuesday and I had to wait until the Friday. So yeah, it was quite painful not getting any information, not getting any data.
And especially when you're just lying around all day in a hospital ward with all that going on around you and the noise and what it must have taken an eternity. I felt like an eternity to get those answers. Yeah,
so the first day there was obviously a lot to adjust to. Like you said, it was loud. We all know what happens at night time in hospitals. They're pretty nuts places because, again, it's not their fault. But, a lot of the elderly members go a little bit doolally. I had one next to me who, on the first night I was there, she did move after the first night, I think, because she unfortunately went a little bit downhill, but she was completely doolally. She was getting quite angry, screaming out my father-in-law's name repeatedly, which was quite surreal, and just really was not great to be next to. And obviously at this point I was allowed visitors up until 8 p.m.
Yeah.
Sorry, well, not even at this point. That's how it works. At 8 p.m. all guests have to go. So during the day, Kat, my wife, friends, my parents would visit. Then 8 o'clock, it's sort of, on that first day, it was like everyone had to leave. And I suppose then you're stuck with your own thoughts. And again, with all of the sudden cardiac death stuff and all of that being in my head, I was thinking, well, am I even going to last the night? Which obviously is a bit of a difficult place to think. But I just tried to be as positive as possible. And with all of the noise going on, I just ended up putting in some noise cancelling headphones and listening to The Master Plan by Oasis on repeat. I mean, I must have listened to it 100 times. I don't know why, it just seemed to be really comforting, and it just took me back to a really good place, that sort of like late 90s. And I just watched a lot of films. But yeah, it was a little bit disconcerting, sort of A, not being able to go to sleep, but B, worrying if you were going to wake up. And the reality was that I don't think that was a justified concern. But then I found out, this is after sort of like night 2 or 3, that my heart rate had gone as low as 25, which obviously I kind of wish no one had told me at the time, because, obviously when you sleep, your heart rate goes down anyway. It's quite normal, but it shouldn't really go below 45. If your resting heart rate is 65, I think it's quite common for it to go down quite significantly overnight. But yeah, going down to 25, it might even have been lower, I think. And one of the nurses came up to me and was like, I was checking on you all night because I was really worried that, there was something wrong. And yeah, I think I would have rather have not known that. Yeah. But so maybe it was a justified concern about this whole sleep thing. But eventually I kind of got used to it. I think not knowing anything and not getting any communication started to get me a little bit worked up. I just kind of felt that the actual human side of the care was a bit lacking. But I guess you have to sort of put up with that because, A, they're really busy. The nurses were absolutely phenomenal. I mean, the more junior members of staff, from all different walks of life, different countries, they were just absolutely superb. They really did make it a lot more bearable and really kind. They weren't sort of necessarily sort of cardiac experts to an extent, but they knew enough to.
They're people experts.
They're definitely. It was great, and obviously you build up relationships with them over the days you're there.
That's great.
Yeah, it was really good.
So much so that you started calling it a hotel after a while, didn't you?
Yeah, I kept making a slip of calling it my hotel, and that I was having guests to my hotel rather than visitors to the hospital. But the food was a lot better than I thought. You think there's that old adage of, you're eating the food that puts a lot of people into hospital. But that certainly I didn't find was the case. As we've talked a lot about whole food, plant-based diets and all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't say it was like a highest quality ingredients, but actually the food was fantastic in terms of, really good vegan options, but decent, healthy, sort of sensible choices like cottage pie, and it wasn't all just like burgers and chips and stuff that is not going to make you any better. It was pretty good. And as you do, you get talking to other people on the ward. Made a lot of friends, and it certainly wasn't the worst place to be. It's just the nature of it is pretty grueling in a way, because obviously a lot of people are very unwell in there.
Well, that's the thing. You were probably the youngest by, I don't know, I'm guessing 20, 25 years. There are lots of people there for lifestyle problems, sort of heavy smokers and things like that. And there you are, someone that's fit and doing lots of exercise, in and amongst them all. It must have been a really strange sensation. But I think for me, obviously you kept us posted all the way through and we came to see you and what have you, but your mental fortitude all the way through in that scenario, given a few weeks before we were questioning how we would deal with something like that if we were faced with a situation that unexpected, was remarkable. Yeah,
thanks. I guess there was a side of me that thought, we talk a lot about mindset. We talk about it a lot on this podcast. And I knew that going down that whole why me, poor me, I'm the youngest one here. I just knew there was no point in entertaining that kind of stuff, because it just wasn't going to help. And like the older ones in particular, there was a side of me that thought, well, it really sucks to see you in this position, but hey, you've got this far. Yeah. Some of the older ones were easily in their late 80s, early 90s. And I don't know what obviously the outcomes were for some of them, but I'm sure some of them went home and carried on. Yeah. I think sometimes I got a bit frustrated, because I would say 60-70% of the people there were probably there due to smoking. There was a guy that came in who just really didn't want to sort of seemingly take any advice about smoking, and had put himself in there through that. And, there was a side of me that thought, man, I'm here for a reason I don't even quite understand yet. And these guys are here. And actually, one thing I learned with heart attacks is, okay, very, very bad ones are very serious. But a lot of minor heart attacks, you can go in the morning, be stented, and actually potentially be out that day, or maybe even the next day. So I saw a lot of people come and go. And
a stent, just for those who aren't aware, I think is an incision again into the wrist, and it's placing with a microscopic camera and technology to be able to put almost like a mesh spring within a key point in an artery to prop it up. Is that right?
I think so.
They can do that within pretty quick. I mean, that's incredible technology.
It's amazing. Yeah, and these guys live and breathe it. And they all have different specialisms. So some are like wiring guys, some are plumbing guys, they called it, which is more artery stuff. But all of them have like a sort of a cross knowledge of all these things. And it's amazing. Like they said to me when I had my angiogram, if we see anything, we're going to stent you then and there. And obviously mine were clear. So, but it's amazing. I mean, I didn't realize that heart attacks were almost so routine. I mean, we obviously know globally that they're one of the biggest killers. But I didn't realize that they were so good and efficient at managing that process. And it's definitely an eye-opener when you think, wow, so many people in there were lifestyle related. Not that that's a surprise to me, but particularly around smoking. And there was a side of me that thought, man, apart from too much beer over the years, other than that, diet, lifestyle, exercise, maybe, again, I've reflected on this since it happened, maybe too long underlying low levels of stress or whatever. But yeah, that was a little bit of okay. So, I've made these choices to not do these things that put you here, but I'm here anyway. But again, yeah, like you said, mindset wise, I guess looking back, I did handle it quite well.
But I mean, it's funny how things work out as well. I mean, obviously you can't choose the timings of these things, but the fact that we sat down a week and a half earlier and you had this totally inspiring conversation with Tina and the battle that she's going through, and then a week and a half later you're in hospital going through your own battle. Having had that conversation with someone you never met before, did you take any comfort from some of the mental toughness that Tina showed in her battle?
Definitely, yeah. And me and Tina are talking quite regularly, even to this day, I think because of that. But it definitely does help, because you have to sit there and think, okay, she's going through something. She's classed as terminal, obviously, which is very, very disappointing to hear. And obviously we deeply hope that changes. But there's no question it helped, because if you can see, she's going through a situation which in many ways is almost worse, but to see someone quite far down that journey, it did make you think, okay, you're not the only person who has to deal with stuff like this. It feels very unique to you. It feels like a why me moment. But again, I definitely think talking to Tina, I guess also talking to Paul, you look at his procedure and how he did an Ironman off the back of that. I mean, all of that stuff definitely helped.
Yeah. I mean, we're lucky to have had this conversation, aren't we? And that's why we started this whole podcast, to unearth stories like that. And we're looking forward to many, many more in months to come. So you're in hospital, still not fully understanding the situation in the depth that you'd like to. So what happened next?
So waiting for the MRI, and then that day came, which all of us were quite excited about. Talking to friends, parents, excuse me, talking with Kat. A lot of people around me were quite optimistic. I kind of almost got into my head that I had a feeling something might be pretty sinister. Again, from knowing a little bit before because of my dog, reading, having a lot of time to kill. I was saying to people around me, look, I've got a feeling there's going to be some of that stuff you don't want, like cardiomyopathy, dilation. But I had started to feel quite normal. I was like, well, I've been here 4 days. I'm quite stable. The heart definitely was all over the shop. The rhythm on the ECG, it had a mind of its own. It was crazy. But outside of that, I'm like, well, surely this can't be, this can't be that bad. Maybe the optimism around me is right. So then I got in an ambulance to the John Ratcliffe? Is that
in Oxford?
In Oxford, is that the one?
Yeah.
Me and Kat went in our own private, sort of almost chauffeur-driven ambulance, which was quite an experience, and really nice nurses. The ambulance drivers. We had a really good laugh. But then got there and had the MRI, and did it. Got back, and then we went in the morning. I remember it was that really cold spell during January, and it was really nice, sunny, crisp day. And then got back, settled down, and I think it was about mid-afternoon, early evening, and my parents were with me, and one of the lead consultants came up, and I guess it was the first time where we realised the extent of things. So he came in and looked a bit sheepish. I don't know if that's the right word, but he certainly looked concerned and a little bit breathless. His voice was wobbling a little bit, and I was like, okay. And I think he really struggled to deliver the news, actually. But he said, look, we've got the results of the MRI, and your heart has suffered a pretty serious insult, to use his exact words, I think it was. It's had a pretty major event, and we still don't know exactly what's caused it, but what we do know is the damage that it's done. And he basically broke it down, which is you've got quite a lot of edema, so quite a lot of liquid in the heart, swelling. You've got a lot of inflammation. You've got quite a lot of scarring, and you've got a lot of dilation in the muscles of the heart. So, like I've been saying to everyone around me, that I can't see how those things haven't happened. He kind of just confirmed, I suppose, everyone's worst fears, which is ultimately the heart had taken a complete battering. Now, inflammation, dilation, that stuff, that's bad. But the main thing, I think, was the scarring, because you can't reverse scarring in the heart. So he said, look, we have a few ideas of what it could be, but and we're talking to some other people about this and some specialists, but we're still not 100% sure. But you are going to, you have to realize that this is quite serious. And I didn't really know what quite serious meant, but, it was obviously a realization that there was some serious stuff going on. So I said to him, look, what are we talking about here? Have I got a few weeks to live? Are we talking like years? Or, obviously, I don't think that was probably the most appropriate question, but I would hazard a guess that's what most people would ask. And he said, look, I don't know. And I said, okay, but are we talking like a year? And he was like, no, I don't think so. But we need to get some more answers. So, yeah, obviously with my parents being next to me, I really felt for them, because obviously hearing that about your son is not easy. I wasn't overly concerned. I know that sounds a bit strange, but it was like I'd already got very used to the idea that this was something serious. So, yeah, I guess it was just a case of, well, look, let's get some more answers. So as that day went on, he then kind of disappeared for a bit. And I spoke to another consultant who actually came and showed me some of the imagery of the heart. And he said, look, this is the amount of scarring. And I said to him, like, oh, okay, is that like really bad? Because it doesn't look like it's that much to me. He's like, it's not the worst I've seen. Like that was supposed to be a positive. But he just said, look, I think there's three possibilities of what it could be. And what I'm hoping for is it might be myocarditis. And I knew a lot about myocarditis because of the investigation and reading I'd done around COVID. And what myocarditis is, I might be getting confused here with pericarditis, but effectively it's like an inflammation of the myocardium, which is an inflammation of the surrounding of the heart, effectively. Now I think you can have very serious versions of myocarditis that can be really serious, but I believe it can be treatable and reversible if it's not too serious and you catch it early. Again, I'm not medical, so I may be getting some of that wrong. But he said, yeah, I'm kind of hoping it's myocarditis. But what it also could be is effectively congenital heart failure or heart failure in general, which is not what you want, especially at this age, because there is no cure for that. All you can really do is take medication and hope that it works and you last as long as possible. And then the other one which they came up with, and again from sort of my various investigations, was that over the years was something I'd never heard of, which was a thing called sarcoidosis. And he said, we're thinking that it could be more and more likely that it is that. So I had no idea what it was, and they started to explain it to me in high level.
I'd never heard of it before, had you?
No. And he said, like, almost it would be kind of like the middle ground out of the three options. It's not a happy diagnosis, but it's not your kind of serious heart failure stuff. So anyway, the other thing that came up was a thing called ejection fraction, which is this is off the back of the MRI, and it was a way in which the consultant sort of graded it for me in terms of severity. And he said, look, your ejection fraction is 42% off the back of the MRI. Now, MRIs aren't the best tool for ejection fraction, but the normal percentage is 55%. That's a sort of lower range of normal. So he said that's kind of where you're at.
What is ejection fraction?
It's basically how much fluid, what percentage of fluid can the left ventricle pump out of itself effectively? How much force and sort of pressure can it push around the heart?
Which is his primary function. At the end of it.
Exactly. So, 42% is not a good reading, but sort of they class under 35% as like, really bad. And so 42% was kind of, I looked at it like, okay, well, it's not the end of the world. And again, the slightly more jolly consultant was like, look, I've got people in here who have got ejection fraction of 15% and are still functioning. So, there were some positive signs, but I think what they kept saying is for someone of your age, this is really concerning. So, so the ejection fraction was where it was, and it was an indication of the reality, which was the heart had taken a beating, but it was still functioning. And it's kind of why I felt quite normal, because it was doing enough and I was coping with it really well because I was young and fit. So from there, it then got to the evening, and the first consultant came back, and he looked a lot more relaxed. He looked a lot more happy with himself. And he said, look, we've been speaking to the Brompton, which is a specialist cardiac unit, and they specialize in sarcoidosis, or they called it sarcoid. And they are 95% sure that you've got cardiac sarcoidosis, which in the scheme of things is sort of like that middle ground. It's not good news in a sense, but it's not catastrophic news. And I think they just felt happy that they knew now which direction to take things. And one of the things which they talked about as soon as I'd gone in was the prospect of a pacemaker. It's one of the first things which you do with sarcoid if you go in presenting heart block with a really irregular rhythm and with damage to the heart like I had, is you then look to put in that pacemaker or an ICD, which is a pacemaker which keeps your heart pacing, so it keeps it a straight rhythm, but also it has a defibrillator in it. So effectively, it's like to use his phrase, it's like a sort of paramedic sitting in your chest. But effectively, it's always listening if there's an irregular rhythm, and then it will kick in. So he kind of was like, look, it's still not great news, but we know what it is now, and it's treatable. And so what we need to do is we need to get the pacemaker in, and then we need to then get you with the Brompton to then start your medication. And then there'll be two forms of medication. One which will be to manage what they call the heart failure conditions, which, although I'm not technically in heart failure, that's still what the terminology they use, which can be quite alarming, but you kind of get used to it. But then the other side is that sarcoidosis is an autoimmune disease, which again is kind of was news to me, because again, from a lot of the content that we both listen to, things like Peter Attia, Andrew Huberman, Rich Roll, you hear a lot about autoimmune diseases and how you can kind of control them with diet and lifestyle.
So what is an autoimmune disease for those that don't know?
Yeah, well, the best way I could explain it is it's when the body's defense mechanism goes haywire. Its immune system just starts to basically attack the body rather than treat it. It's where it sort of gets confused and sort of almost does the wrong thing. So with sarcoid, what it does is the condition forms what they call granulomas, which are clumps of cells which will go into the various organs or sort of parts of the body that the disease is affecting, basically. So just to be clear as well, sarcoidosis is quite rare. I think I'm not sure on the exact number, but I think it's around 7 or 8 per 100,000, if that, I think. Wow. But it's, so there'll be I think there's probably around tens of thousands of cases, but it's not like, it may even not be as many as that, to be honest. I need to check my figures, but it's not like, cancer, which is 1 in 2. It's super, super rare. I mean, I'd never even heard of it. So
yeah, so you can have sarcoidosis of the heart, which is what you've had, isolated to the heart, but it could also spread to other organs, or people can have more distributed sarcoidosis, can't they?
yeah, exactly. So going through this process, I've made really good friends with another sufferer of this he was on the sarcoidosis UK sarcoidosis website, which obviously I went on to very, very quickly. And he was one of every month the website or the charity do a star guest, if you will, about, then they share their story. And he was very, very similar to my age. He had a slightly worse start to the situation than I did, bearing in mind that I actually never did luckily pass out or have any serious events to deal with. He had the very opposite, where I won't tell his whole story, but I got in touch with him. We've since become friends. We talk most weeks actually, or message each other. Unfortunately, he's a Liverpool fan, and I'm a United fan, so that causes some banter. But he has cardiac sarcoidosis, but he's also got multi-organ sarcoidosis. So he's got it in other parts like his lungs. I think you can get it on the skin, things like that. So he's got a slightly different case to me, but the main thing I think for his focus is the cardiac element. So yeah, my situation is called isolated cardiac sarcoidosis. So it's only affecting the heart, which you would think is kind of better than having it in multi-organs, but I think it comes with its own different complications and severity. So that's kind of where we got to after sort of day, I think it was about day 6 or 7. I was in hospital, nearly said hotel then again.
Yeah, exactly.
I was in hospital for, I think, about 10, 11 days.
That's a big bill for a hotel.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I got the pacemaker put in.
And that is not an insignificant procedure either, is it? I mean, you're having a pacemaker fitted.
No, it's not a straightforward procedure. That said, look, I think with all of these, I've learned about myself. I can handle quite a lot of the procedures that you go through. I think if you struggle with things like needles, what are they called? Those things where you they leave them on your wrist usually so that they can put.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Not catheters,
no.
But similar word.
That's the word that popped into my head.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think if the whole way through this, I mean, I was black and blue with different things going in, anticoagulant injections. You have to have your bloods taken like every day at least. These different things, they do batter you a little bit, but I just didn't get fazed by that. And I think the cannula, well done. And then the pacemaker, they were talking to me like almost like, oh look, are you going to be okay? I'm like, I don't care. Just let's get on with it.
Yeah.
By this point, because I'm like, if you guys really think it's needed, yeah, I'm game. They were, unfortunately, it's quite a big device, and I said, I really, honestly, let's get going. And it's under local anaesthetic. They do an incision, I suppose, maybe an inch below your collarbone, and it's about the size, the size of half an iPhone, probably. The way they explained it, which is about right. You can see it very clearly through the skin. I've still got. The scar is still that kind of pinky, it's quite a big scar, but it'll go. Yeah, and it's fine. The only thing I'd say, it was freezing in there, but all the staff were fantastic. I got to know them through all the different procedures I'd had. They were great. They made it really comfortable. They did put a sheet over my face, which made it a little bit disorientating, but I was just talking to them the whole time. You're under local anaesthetic, you don't feel any pain. You can feel some pulling and tugging and stuff like that, but I would not say for anybody who has to do it, it's really not a worrying procedure. It's actually, they were so good at it, the guys. They made it just feel like it was an everyday thing. So it's amazing what they can do.
Technology's off the charts, isn't it? I mean, to have that sitting there as a comfort level, as and when it's needed. And you say that's the daddy of all pacemakers, didn't you?
I think so, yeah. It's the same as what you hear the footballers getting. So like Christian Eriksen, I think he had cardiomyopathy, I think, from congenital heart failure. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, he's got an ICD. And mine's it's a biventricular one. So it's sort of effectively what that means is it paces both sides of the heart, because you've got a right ventricle and a left ventricle, and each chamber of the heart does different things. But the left ventricle really is the most important one. I can't actually remember exactly why they paced the right side as well. I don't know actually. I think it's just to keep the heart, because it was so erratic. Keep my heart, going in the sort of right sort of unified direction, if that makes sense. But yeah, the operation went really well. I did have quite a lot of bruising. And also, I noticed straight away once it was in, almost like let's say a popping sensation in my ribs, which a few weeks later I had to go and try and get sorted because it was quite distracting. But I think that was just because there's different nodes that sit up the wire that goes into your heart, and it's amazing what they can do. They can just sort of adjust it and tweak it almost as per your own body remotely.
With no follow-up incisions or invasion, really?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think they were really pleased with how that procedure went. But yeah, and look, after that, unfortunately, I had to leave my hotel. And then they were like, look, the pacemaker's doing its thing.
This was the next day, wasn't it? It was very soon after I
actually ended up staying in another night just because of the sensation I was getting. And they thought, look, there's no harm. We do need your bed. But, look, another night's not going to hurt. We can monitor you. And if we feel comfortable, then you can go home. And I was quite pleased with that, because I suppose I wouldn't say I was anxious, but I was like, the more time I'm in this sort of cocoon, the better. And I'd rather know the pacemaker's doing its thing. And the way that they were talking, I think they all relaxed, because they were like, look, now you've got the ICD, now you've got the pacemaker, you've got the safety net in case anything happens. Yeah. Now, I think obviously anyone with a pacemaker, you don't want the ICD to have to do its thing. You don't want it to have to shock you. But I think they relaxed because they were like, right, he's covered, he's good to go. So yeah, it was after that, and then they literally sent me home.
How was that? It must have been a strange, almost mixed emotions, I would imagine, coming home, because you're desperate to see the kids and surround yourself with familiar surroundings, but then leaving the comfort zone of having the expertise around you. It must have been a bit of a strange feeling.
It was quite surreal. I'd been there for, like I said, I think it was 10 days at least. And I had acclimatized to it, getting food brought to you. And obviously being home, all of a sudden, daily life starts to become a reality. You start thinking about work. You start thinking about all the stuff you did before. So picking the kids up from school, taking them to their various sports activities. And because I had the pacemaker, I wasn't allowed to drive for a month. And which I love driving, because it's just that freedom of being able to go wherever you want, whenever you want. So being bedbound I wasn't particularly looking forward to. And obviously what I realised is it meant that Kat was going to have to take care of me, basically, and she already had enough to do looking after the kids. So I felt maybe like I was going to be a bit of a burden. I was a bit concerned about that. But look, on the flip side, it was a case of I get to go home, I get to see the kids, and I get to basically start to get things back into some sort of normality, check in on work, but also I had to relax. So watch some films, catch up on stuff like that. The only thing I would say is you are acutely aware of it's quite an important period, because it's kind of, no one knows what's going to happen with sarcoid. No one knows what's going to happen with that type of condition. The fundamental problem with it is no one can kind of sit you down and guarantee you everything's going to be okay, unfortunately. It's one of those things where the way it gets you is primarily through like a sudden cardiac event. Some people do, unfortunately, sort of succumb to heart failure, but it's a very low percentage. The main way it gets people is through a sudden cardiac event, which is why it's so important to get people with a pacemaker, get a pacemaker in as quickly as possible once you have the diagnosis. But I think that was the only slightly disconcerting thing. And to be fair, I went down a serious rabbit hole, as I'm known to do.
Another one.
And did a lot of research, probably too much, to be honest, because I really wanted to know what I was dealing with.
Yeah, but that's how you're wired, isn't it? You want to fully understand all the data behind it, so you can make your own decision or your own analysis of what the situation is to the best of your knowledge, and that's the way you like to operate. And you did a lot of research on that, and to the point where I think sometimes quite quickly you sounded like a consultant talking about, from the outside, you sounded like a consultant. You genned up so much on it.
Yeah, well, it was funny. One of the consultants, when he spoke to me originally, said, "Oh, okay, you're obviously medical," and I was like, "No." He's like, "Oh. How do you know so much?" And I was like, "Well, I've done my reading, and there's a lot of content on YouTube actually by some of the main guys that are at the Brompton. So I got very familiar with a lot of the language. And look, I went down some fairly dark holes, because you start to read about some of the prognosis factors, and I realized when I correlated that with my MRI and echocardiogram that unfortunately I was one of the worst. I kind of ticked all the boxes for what you don't want, unfortunately. The main one being ejection fraction, another one being what they call BNP, which is I think a particular chemical that the heart gives off when it's under a certain condition. And the other one, which was actually a good thing, was any sign of VTs or previous arrhythmias, so ventricular tachycardia or arrhythmias, which still to this day I think is such a blessing that I've not had any of those, because I think if you're already presenting with that stuff, it does sort of demonstrate worse outcomes. But yeah, I think I probably, and people warned me of it at the time, they said, look, don't go too deep into it, but I did. And I had nothing else to do, I didn't feel ready to get my head back into work. And, really appreciate all the guys who clubbed in around me, and my clients were really supportive. Thank you to those guys, because, they've been so epic, and they still are. So I did go down a bit of a rabbit hole with it, but I think after I then had a CT PET scan 2 weeks after. I would say those first 2 weeks were tough, because you just sat there with no information, just hoping nothing goes wrong, basically. But then I had a CT PET at the Brompton, which obviously was going to give more data and still give 100% diagnosis. I'd still not actually said to me that you have got sarcoidosis. They said it's suspected. So then I had the CT PET 2 weeks.
To this day, or
no? So after the CT PET, after 2 weeks, then they said, it's confirmed. Although it was weird, because the CT PET radiography report said not sufficient evidence for sarcoidosis. So it's really baffling. Yeah. But they said, look, with all of the things you've got, if you align all of them up, it's a definite diagnosis. Okay. But also that, Kat, when I got home, was incredible. We thought, right, it's an autoimmune disease. Let's go super clean on diet. Let's do everything right. So Kat, bless her, was just making this insane, like whole food, plant-based food. Every meal was coming up like this just absolutely epic.
Gourmet.
Yeah. Especially, managing her own job and the kids and everything like that. I feel almost bad now that she went through that, but, it was absolutely amazing. And so we had the CT PET, and actually when we got the results, it actually sounded quite good. I think I was at your house when the guy rang, and he said, yeah, your ejection fraction's 54. And I was like, well, there you go. Amazing. So all this diet and effort we've done to do everything by the book, that's really paid off, which in hindsight was a bit naive. But again, that was a really, that was quite good. But it meant we also had the diagnosis. They then sent me for what they call a intravenous, basically then what they needed to do was start the autoimmune treatment to actually knock the sarcoidosis out, basically. Because what you're worried about with sarcoidosis is that there's two care pathways. One is managing the heart, but then there's also managing the disease, the autoimmune disease. My local guys were managing the heart failure stuff, so they'd given me 4 different drugs to do various things to control the actual heart damage. But what the Brompton were doing was now sort of, they were in charge of actually treating the autoimmune disease. So what they do is they put you on an IV prednisolone sort of steroid like treatment for an hour a day, I think it is, for like 3 days. So I had to go up to the Brompton each day. And again, they didn't want me staying in hospital because they didn't want me being at any risk of infection and stuff like that. So I had to drive up every day. Well, I didn't drive. I had to get someone to do it for me. But so that started. So then they started a pretty heavy dose of that treatment to basically shock the autoimmune disease to stop doing what it was doing. And then then after that, effectively then, in addition to the loads of heart failure meds I was taking, they then added different types of drugs to the autoimmune disease treatment. So prednisolone and a drug called methotrexate. And they have to be quite careful in terms of different amounts that they give you because they're quite potent drugs. So the methotrexate you can only actually take once a week, and they advise you to take it on a Friday because effectively over that weekend you'll feel like you've got a pretty serious hangover. Whenever
you noticed or experienced any of those symptoms?
So I feel like I've coped quite well with all the drugs, to be honest. I think Kat will definitely tell you that my moods have been swinging a little bit, and I would definitely say that's true. But I don't think that's just the methotrexate. I think that's just in general.
Well, it's a lot to process, isn't it? You're 5 months in, really, aren't you? And, it's a significant life event.
Yeah, and look, a lot of people take methotrexate. It's the same drugs that you would take if you have quite a lot of autoimmune diseases. So if you've got rheumatoid arthritis, we've got a friend who takes methotrexate. But yeah, some people seem to react very badly. I mean, there's no doubt. I know I've taken it, but I would say I've had some weird tingling in my feet, all that kind of stuff, but nothing drastic. I mean, considering again how badly the heart was damaged, I actually feel really since the treatment started, since I've been home, I think I've been very lucky with how it's progressed. So the main time I struggled since being home was actually the day before you guys and some of our other friends in the village went snowboarding. Although, don't get me wrong, I'm very, very grateful that I'm just even here. Yeah. So it sounds a little bit ridiculous to be kind of upset you can't go snowboarding.
Yeah, but you've always been one for FOMO anyway if you're missing out on something. But I guess it makes you want it even more if you know you can't do it for this year.
100%. But there's a real positive to that, which is it makes you realise you just shouldn't be grateful for stuff you take for granted. And I mean, not that we ever took snowboarding trips for granted, but it was the first time, I think, where I'd had a day before, I think, where I'd had a little bit of a tough day with the company. Obviously, I run my own company. It made me realise that, the gravitas of the situation, just getting your house in order, the reality is it's been amazing that I run a small business, but it is quite a lot of it evolves around me. Now, obviously, there's a lot of safety nets we have so that all the work that we do is covered, but it's just, the implications of sometimes it's got to me a bit where it's like, the income it brings in, if anything happens to me, so that was the other thing I had to get pretty pragmatic, even just doing things like having a will, power of attorney, all of that stuff we hadn't done because I'm quite young. So we had to get all of that stuff in order. And, it's one of those things we've got life insurance, but you often don't get all of the other stuff because you think, I'll never need that. Yeah. And, and you do sit there and think in hindsight, I wish I'd just got insured up to the eyeballs. And I've got private insurance through the company, but it's pretty useless for something like this. So all of that stuff, kicks in, and sometimes there are days where, whether it's the meds or the condition, you do just kind of want to stay in bed and ignore everything. But we all have days like that, and a lot of us haven't been through an experience like this. Yeah. So I can't remember exactly what the date was. It was probably a couple of months ago now, but we have a mutual friend, for example, who's a therapist who's been very kind with his time, we just catch up over lunch. And that was after that day, the day before you guys went snowboarding, I was like, do you know what, everyone keeps telling me I should talk to someone. I don't feel like I need to. I feel like I'm really handling it very well. But that was the first time where I'm like, you know what, I'm actually feeling a bit overwhelmed. I'm feeling a little bit sorry for myself that I can't go snowboarding. Even though I kind of just want to focus on my health and all of this stuff, I've got to be realistic that I've got to get to work. So I think there was that little window where I was like, yeah, do you know what, I'm not, maybe it wouldn't hurt to talk to someone. And that was, again, yes, it sucked that I couldn't go snowboarding, but actually the result of that emotion was really positive. Again, another relationship built, to sort of not necessarily help me, but help the people around me. So,
and I remember you saying, since this has happened in your process, that you put a lot more value on things that, like you say, having conversations with people or certain relationships, whereas before you would have put focus on it, but it's almost heightened your sensitivity around it, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess to kind of almost semi wrap up a little bit, look, the reality with this condition is there are no guarantees. So we were talking about Tina earlier. In many ways, I would say that her situation, not to compete, but hers is potentially worse than mine because it's classed as terminal. Obviously, we really hope that changes. The challenge with mine is that it's quite a long process, and the reality is that anything can happen at any time. I don't think, hopefully, it's realistic, but I could have a sudden cardiac death really at any moment because of the damage that's been done, because of the nature of the condition. That's the reality that I'm just going to have to live with. Hopefully, my aim is to live until at least 85, and I have no idea how realistic that is. But anyway, what I'm trying to get at is the reality of this condition is that my time is very likely is going to be severely impacted. I'm lucky to be alive, and obviously the Apple Watch, I have a huge amount of gratitude for. But one of the things that the therapist said was, again, sort of outside of a formal setting, he said, look, 90% of the people I see who have had a life-changing health event, they do analyze everything and they do take stock of everything. And they also said, and he said, look, you do not need my help. Let's carry on chatting and having lunch because I enjoy it, but you don't need my help. You're not anxious, you're not depressed, you're not doing the why me thing. You're way beyond wherever I would try and get someone to, usually who's gone through something like this. And I'm not saying that in any way to make myself sound good, but he did say what you've really got to focus on is how do you best, like I just said, manage people around you. And yeah, so look, I think it might sound a little bit unbelievable, but outside of the actual health concern and just managing that, this process has been bizarrely positive. All it's really made me do is have more appreciation for obviously my wife and kids, and the hope that I can be here as long as they need me, and that there's a lot of messages I think which have become even clearer for me off the back of this, which I can touch on. But definitely what I've been doing is just embracing relationships, new and old, reassessing certain criteria in a way that, is really important to me, that I really want to see from the people that I spend my time with. Not saying that I'm going around like being overly critical about people, but I've definitely gravitated to people, who have got an open mindset, who have critical thinking, who are spending their time in a really positive way. And it just makes me realize that, a little bit like the podcast, you can learn so much from so many people in different ways. And definitely, from obviously coming out of a period of having young kids, they're not that young anymore. They're 11 and nearly 14. And obviously from running a business, those are two things which take up a lot of time. First of all, I'm enjoying those things even more. I'm enjoying running the company more than I ever have. Compared to this health situation, running a company is not difficult. it's something before this happened that I almost looked at as not a negative challenge, but it was almost like a, you know, I don't know the right way to put it. I almost looked at it as more of a stress, whereas now I'm like, no, this has never been a stress. You know, we offer amazing things to our clients. We do great things to help them be better. This is like actually a proper mission and a proper purpose. And obviously with the kids, you know, we've all been there. You know, we've got a hangover or we haven't slept that well, and you know, we just want to go and do our own thing. And the kids, you know, the kids maybe can, you know, take up a lot of your time. You know, company and kids can take up a lot of your time. So what I'm really trying to do is to make sure that I now have a balance where actually I'm dedicating more time in my day to do the things I want to do. And most of the time that involves sitting down talking to people. You know, there's a few characters that, you know, I could bring up where, whether it's through support or whether it's just through an aligned mindset, you know, where we've just been talking about so many of the great elements of life and so many things that need to be embraced that actually I think often we lose sight of. And for me, I've just become so grateful for what I have, but also what hopefully I have to look forward to. But certainly I've realised as well what I'm not going to do is waste a lot of time on, I think unfortunately, some of the traps and narratives that we all get ourselves into, you know, whether it's negative thinking, whether it's poor self-perception, whether it's, oh, I'm so stressed, or like, no, there just isn't time for that. And I know that's easier said than done, but I do almost feel like I wish everybody could go through an experience like this without having the health concerns, but they could actually almost have this revelation that I feel like I've had. And not saying that I think I'm some kind of guru or that I've got it all worked out either, but it's certainly changed my perspective massively for the better. And that doesn't mean I'm sure whether it's the drugs or whether it's whatever, whether it's the condition. I'm sure, again, Kat will tell you that I'm probably still quite up and down. And there's probably days where, you know, I know the days where I kind of wake up and you just don't feel right. And again, that must be an element of the condition and the drugs. You know, a lot of the things with sarcoidosis is fatigue. But most of the time, yeah, I'm just getting up, pretty happy about the day, trying not to get stressed about anything. And, you know, it's a couple of weeks ago, I think we were talking, I think I had lunch out and dinner out every day that week with a friend. You know, even some like I had lunch with my oldest friend who we just met for some pasta because it sort of worked out in our schedule. And then we ended up just sitting there for 5 hours, you know, just getting into it. And that's just, you know, I felt so much gratitude and I felt like I'd learned so much from that conversation from someone I've known since I was 2, you know. So yeah, I mean, I think what it's taught me is this now heightened risk of me not being around, you know, a lot sooner than previously planned. In a way, it's exactly like we started at this conversation, you know, with we're all going to die and that's a good thing. I genuinely feel like that point has just been emphasized. I've just got so much to do and I've got so much to squeeze in. I just can't wait to do it. And as I think you found out, and a lot of people have told me since, I could talk before, I could enjoy a good chat before. I think that's absolutely ramped up beyond belief now. So,
Times 3.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's really great to hear your attitude and your take on it because, you know, it does correlate with a lot of the stories we've heard about on the podcast where like life throws up surprises. You know, it's not always going to be a bed of roses, is it? There's going to be times where we're going to have to face some tough challenges, you know, and this is one of the toughest challenges you can face. And, you know, other friends that are going through, you know, similarly tough challenges as well. And sometimes, you know, coming out the other side of it with a different perspective, different outlook on life and taking positives from this experience is, it's really great to hear, I think, really refreshing.
Yeah, thank you. No, and 100%. I think, you know, look, we've both had spells in our younger years with things like anxiety and a lot of people, as we know, like from talking to Chris on our podcast, we know how rife anxiety is and how much depression is increasing. And yeah, I definitely think for me that it's taught me that so much of life is about perception and how you tackle things. And for me, you know, this is the most difficult thing I've ever been through. There's no question.
Yeah.
There's no point lying about that. It is fundamentally life-changing. And what it's made me realize is you just don't know it's really cliche, but you just don't know what you should be grateful for. You know, you and I have sat here, the weather's crap, or, you know, Nap Hill, which is where we live, is, you know, it's a bit boring. And it is a bit boring, but it's also completely epic. You know, we're surrounded by woodlands. We get to do the most amazing dog walks. We've got a great community of friends. We get involved in that community. You know, we play snooker every Wednesday. These small things are really powerful. And that doesn't mean I still haven't got a ton of ambition to do things in different countries. And look, I don't want to sit here and sound like I'm a life coach just because this has happened. You know, I certainly wouldn't be as audacious to think I'm in any position to go and tell people who have got different things going on in their lives, you know, how they need to think. But it's completely changed my perception in terms of you should be prepared for difficult things. They're going to happen. And I have a tendency of way overreacting to certain things. You know, I've had things happen in the business or in previous jobs or, you know, in other situations in life that you think, oh, this is such a big deal. I can't believe it. This is unfair, or why has that happened? And I'm not saying I'm that bad, but I think now the way I look at it, and I hope I can stay true to this, is, you know, if you don't get used to doing difficult things, then everything becomes difficult. And now I think I look at things like challenges as exciting things to overcome. Now, look, I don't want any more bad news on my health. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I want to invite challenges. But what it makes me realize is, you know, this has put things into perspective of what really difficult is and what I need to think about in terms of perspective and what is really important. So look, there's been so many positives that have come out of an incredibly difficult situation. And I do appreciate that this is probably harder for people around me than it is for me. You know, I know this has not been easy for my parents because, you know, I'm only 40 and any risk, you know, to your child is extremely concerning. And so I hope for their sake I can get better as quickly as possible and as stable as possible for them. Obviously for Kat and the kids, you know, again, I'm sure there's been a lot of worry. I mean, I think they've managed it really, really well. But outside of that stuff, which I can't really control, you know, I can't control how other people feel. You know, if the podcast or if this podcast or if the message can be like, look, things might feel shitty, things might feel difficult, but try and reflect on it. Like, are they really as difficult as you think? Are these situations that we think are so serious and so critical, are they really in the scheme of things? And actually, are they just blocking, you know, having a great time and having a great life? And are you really using time in the best way, you know, in the best way possible? And yeah, for me, it's just been a real eye-opener in terms of, you know, really genuinely every day, what can you do every day that just makes it worth it? And, you know, maybe just don't watch Netflix for 4 hours eating a pizza, or maybe that's how you want to spend your time, but that's not how I'm going to spend my time.
Yeah, it sharpens your focus, doesn't it, when you go through something like this in terms of what's important, like you've just talked about. So what's next after the last 5 months? Obviously it's been quite a whirlwind, hasn't it, and quite a fork in the road almost in your life, really, isn't it? So what's next?
So the good news is I got an email this morning saying that my ejection fraction is kind of stable, if not slightly better.
Brilliant.
There's no troponin in my blood, which I think means that the heart isn't getting any more damage, and generally it was quite positive. You know, I have been having some irregular rhythms and ectopic beats, which I think we keep saying that should be like an album name.
Definitely.
But again, I've raised some of the drugs, which it seems to be, even as we're talking, it seems my heart seems much more stable. It has been like I've had a flipping musical instrument in my, like some sort of percussion outfit in my chest, which has been a bit disconcerting. But in terms of what next, my instant reaction was, cool, let's go on holiday, when I got that email, because I haven't been on a plane or travelled anywhere since January, which, as you know, for me is a struggle. The reality is I'm really excited about getting the business pushing on. You know, it's in a decent state, but you know, I really now want it to be that mission and that purpose that I always set it up to be, which is a vehicle to do great work for our clients, but also be a great environment for people to work. Again, very aligned with what we've been talking about, you know, and on There's Another Way in general, you know. So I'd love to get the business kicking on. In terms of trips and travel, that's going to start to raise in priority once I know what I'm able to do. It may be that I can never go back to what I was doing. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but my heart can't go above 120 at the moment. So just because whilst it's remodeling and they don't want to put it under any stress, they don't want the heart to almost have to adapt to a new way of operating. And if you put it under stress whilst it's remodeling after a big event, then it can kind of lock itself into that sort of bad state. So it may be that my snowboarding days are completely numbered. I don't know. But so travel and, you know, trips with certainly the family are gonna be a priority. And obviously There's Another Way. Really want to just continue that. You know, we've got so many exciting guests. But really the primary thing when you say what am I going to be doing next is just make the most of my time. You know, spend more time with my brother, my parents, Kat and the kids, with obviously my friends, with those, you know, create new relationships. Just, you know, it sounds really cheesy, but every interaction I have these days just feels so much more meaningful, and so there's so much more purpose. So I just want to have a lot more of those type things. It's funny, the therapist guy that I've been chatting with and we've got more friendly, he said it's really strange, you seem more relaxed since this happened. And I'm just like, I don't take anything badly about that, but what do you mean by that? He just said you just seem more calm and more at peace and more relaxed. And so I think that's got to be a great sign. Yeah, it's a very long answer to a short question, but yeah, I think, and actually I haven't entirely figured it out. You know, I don't know exactly. I think, look, just like I've always said, to be fair, this isn't a new thing. Just doing great things with great people, I think, is going to be the priority.
Yeah. Well said. And thank you for that open, honest, transparent view into what's been... yeah, I mean, I can't even quantify how it's been for the last 5 months. I mean, you've tackled it admirably. The way you've, you know, like I said earlier on, the mental fortitude and your attitude to the whole thing all the way through has been, you know, really inspiring. And yeah, I'm glad that you've been so open and honest and, you know, given us an insight into that world for people that don't know what it's like to go through something like this. So, you know, now know that it's a very rare condition to have, but I think what you found was speaking to different people, you know, the attitude and the learnings that you can take from a significant life event like this can be transposed into different areas, can't they? And translated into different scenarios, I suppose. And if, you know, listening to this story, it inspires one person who might be going through something similar, then that's why we started this podcast. And, you know, I'm certainly looking forward to many more conversations later this year with other people. And, you know, thanks for coming on and talking about it.
Yeah, well, look, hopefully it's been useful for people listening. Hopefully it's somewhat, you know, we were talking about what do we actually hope people will get out of this conversation before we started recording. I have no idea. I have no idea if this is even interesting for people to hear. I mean, a lot of people go through really shitty stuff. But like I said, I think the one thing I will say is that going through something like this with positivity, and if you try and, anxiety is an incredibly powerful, well, from my own experience, anxiety is an extremely powerful emotion. And I hope that through listening to this, people might say, oh, actually, yeah, I realise that there are other people going through difficult things, and you can adapt a mindset that can just make it that bit better. Obviously, if anyone's got sarcoidosis listening to this, more than happy to have a chat with anybody just to share war stories and experiences. I haven't had massive engagement with the charity UK Sarcoidosis, but I was actually going to set up a group here, but I think it's just a bit early. I've been chatting to someone who works there, but obviously if anybody wants to donate or get involved with them, that would be amazing. Again, they're a small charity. I don't think they get masses of funding or anything like that, but this is a disease that is increasing. So, but yeah, I have no idea if this is going to help anybody. As you know, I am an open guy anyway. So if anybody wants to talk more, hopefully some of the cardiology stuff has been helpful for people to hear. I'm not an expert, so again, please don't use this podcast as medical advice. You and I can't even organise a flipping curry I would say piss up in a brewery, but I don't drink anymore. So, we're certainly not cardiologists, is what I'm saying. Yeah. So, but yeah, no, look, thanks for having the chat. And it's been quite an interesting year so far. You with your marathon, this happening to me. Lots of great conversations, lots more to come.
Yeah, who knows what's next? Yeah,
so, well, obviously we've got Noah coming up, which was gutting that we had our first technical glitch. Yeah. But we're going to re-record that, which was just fascinating. We've got Therese, I think is how you say it. Teresa. Got so many interesting things coming. So yeah,
looking forward to that. Good. All right. Thank you. Until next time. There's another way.
Cheers, mate.
I think I'm starting to fade again. I don't want the end. Call up your friend, but I ain't got